Welcome. Our objective today is to provide you with a meticulous and detailed examination of core principles concerning disorder, nonlinearity, and systemic risk.
All of this is drawn from comprehensive research on the topic of antifragility.
And we should state up front that this professional review of the source material was generated using automated intelligence systems. We're here to explore its most critical findings for you.
We're focusing on systems that demonstrate a truly remarkable property, which is gaining from stress, volatility, and uncertainty. This is the characteristic known as antifragility.
We'll also dissect the fragility that seems so inherent in our modern, overly complex structures.
Exactly. And we intend for this conversation to proceed deliberately and clearly, ensuring you achieve a deep and hopefully actionable understanding of these ideas.
Let's begin with the foundation of this analysis, which is the concept of nonlinearity.
It's the perfect place to start. In simple terms, we're talking about systems where the response is just not proportional to the input.
So the sources emphasize that in complex environments, doubling the effort rarely results in doubling the outcome.
It almost never does. The example given is quite intuitive. The benefit you get from spending 2 weekends in Philadelphia is not twice the value of spending just one. The returns diminish, sometimes very sharply.
And this phenomena of diminishing returns, or I suppose increasing sensitivity at the extremes, is fundamental to the entire argument.
It is. This concept becomes absolutely vital when we start to address extreme events, what are often called black swans. We have to understand that the systems that survive are harmed non-linearly.
What does that look like in practice?
Well, consider the distinction the sources make between being struck by a large stone versus being hit by 1,000 pebbles of the same total weight.
Okay.
A fragile object is hurt far, far more by that single large shock than by the cumulative effect of many small stressors. If fragility were linear, if every little pebble added up equally, the system would likely already be broken.
So what remains is only really vulnerable to that one unpredictable, high-impact event.
Precisely. And this inherent nonlinearity, where the outcome is so disproportionate to the input, immediately calls our entire approach to risk prediction into question.
It seems like we might be wasting our time trying to forecast these rare events if the system behaves this way.
That is the crucial central point of the source material. The probability of these rare, high-impact events is, for all practical purposes, not computable.
And that's not just because we don't have enough data.
It's more fundamental than that. The problem is that the model error itself swells exponentially as we try to calculate the probability of increasingly rare events. The less likely the event, the less confidence we should have in any prediction about its timing or its magnitude.
Which is quite the paradox, given the confidence some modelers seem to have. So, if the ability to predict is fundamentally compromised, where should our focus shift?
Our focus has to move away from prediction and toward exposure. We have to distinguish between fragility and risk.
Yeah, so one is knowable and the other isn't.
In a sense, yes. Fragility is a property of an object right now. It's often measurable. We can look at a poorly built structure and assess its vulnerability to a shock. Risk, on the other hand, specifically the risk of a rare future event, is far less tractable.
So by measuring the current fragility of our systems, we control the potential downside, and we can bypass that impossible task of forecasting when the earthquake will strike.
You've got it. The key insight is that volatility itself is not the problem. The problem is the fragility that converts that volatility into ruin.
That transition from prediction to exposure leads us directly into a major critique of modern societal structures. If complexity creates fragility, the sources argue that those who try to fix things, especially from the top down, often cause the most harm.
This is where we have to analyze the phenomenon known as iatrogenics.
Which is the harm done by the healer, the intervener, that actually exceeds the benefit.
Exactly. And this is widely ignored, particularly in complex domains like medicine and macroeconomic policy.
The sources give some potent medical examples.
They do. Unnecessary treatments inherently carry their own risks. For mild, non-critical conditions, the constant cumulative iatrogenic costs and side effects of a treatment can easily outweigh any marginal therapeutic benefit. And what's particularly insidious is that these costs are often assumed to be constant, regardless of the severity of the initial condition.
And I imagine this iatrogenic risk just accelerates exponentially in more complex environments.
It does, which leads to a very strong argument for simplicity. Simpler systems are inherently more robust and less prone to iatrogenics.
Every complication you add creates new problems.
It creates, as the sources put it, multiplicative chains of unanticipated effects. One intervention requires a second to fix the side effects of the first, which then creates new tertiary effects, and it leads to this explosive series of negative consequences.
So the solution proposed is often one of subtraction, not addition.
It's what's called via negativa, intervention by subtraction. You modify man-made systems to let the simple, natural, historically successful mechanisms prevail, rather than constantly adding new layers of complexity.
And the sources don't just stop at critiquing intervention, they also challenge our perception of how knowledge and progress are actually generated.
This is the lecturing birds how to fly effect. We have this deep-seated illusion that academic theory is the engine of practical innovation.
It's a profound causal illusion.
It is. True discovery and progress often emerge from what's called antifragile tinkering, just trial, error, and risk-taking at the practical level. The mistake is what's called the Baconian linear model, which assumes that breakthroughs flow neatly from a university into research and then into design.
And this is what's referred to as an epiphenomenon.
Yes, we're mistaking an epiphenomenon for a causal factor.
Could you elaborate on that causal illusion? If we believe academic knowledge precedes progress, what are we missing?
We are confusing the map for the territory, or the consequence for the cause. The sources use a great analogy of mistaking the compass, which reflects the ship's direction, for the device that actually steers the ship. So in the context of technological progress, academic theory often comes about after an innovation has already been proven successful through empirical trial and error. To establish true causation, knowledge has to be subjected to a really rigorous temporal analysis.
And that separation between theoretical knowledge and practical execution is captured perfectly in the green lumber fallacy.
That fallacy demonstrates the danger of mixing up theoretical understanding, like knowing the precise textbook definition of green lumber, with the actual practical expertise you need to trade it profitably.
So the successful trader might not even know the textbook definition.
They may not, but they understand the phenomenology, the empirical behavior of the commodity. In environments governed by nonlinear payoffs and hidden asymmetries, the capacity for action and the management of exposure almost always trump abstract theoretical understanding. Phenomenologies, these simple empirical regularities you observe over time, tend to be far more robust than academic theories.
So if prediction is compromised and intervention carries these severe risks, the logical next step is to structure our systems so they can actually benefit from uncertainty.
And this is where optionality comes in.
It provides that essential asymmetry, a limited loss combined with a massive potential gain.
Optionality is the structural basis of antifragility. It provides a convex response, in other words, a disproportionately positive payoff as volatility increases.
The historical example of Thales and the olive presses illustrates this perfectly.
It does. He paid a small, limited amount, that was the cost of the option, but he secured huge potential profits when the olive harvest was abundant. And critically, increasing uncertainty makes this optionality more valuable, not less.
Because the potential upside gets bigger relative to the fixed, limited downside.
Exactly. And this thinking leads directly to a practical, immediately implementable strategy for dealing with uncertainty known as the barbell strategy.
So how does this technique address that problem of incomputable risk?
Well, the barbell is a robust dual strategy. It advises against taking that moderate, middle-of-the-road risk, which is often the most fragile position.
Instead, you structure your exposure into two extremes.
You do. The majority of your resources, say 85 to 90%, are placed in maximal safety and robustness. Think of it as cash or very stable long-term assets.
And the small remaining portion.
That 10 or 15% is placed in maximal risk. In speculative, high-optionality ventures, this technique completely remedies the problem of incomputable rare risks because it sets a known maximum loss that is non-catastrophic. You've capped your downside.
That seems incredibly risk-averse for the bulk of the portfolio. A technical audience might immediately worry about losing value to inflation or missing general market growth with 90% in cash.
That is a fair question, but the barbell is a strategy for survival under radical uncertainty, not for optimization under predictable conditions. Its purpose is to ensure that no single unknown event can destroy the entire system.
So you sacrifice some small gains in exchange for protection against large, potentially existential losses.
Correct. And we see this concept of barbelled robustness in the real world. Think about the cab driver, George. His daily income is volatile, but his system is robust because he serves many small employers. There's no single point of failure.
Unlike his brother, who has a predictable single income, but is fragile to the loss of that one job.
Precisely. Or think about Switzerland. It's stable at the aggregate national level precisely because of the immense political and economic variation and noise that's operating at the local canton level.
Now, turning to a surprising application of antifragility, the domain of ideas and information. We intuitively assume positive attention is good, but the sources paint a very counterintuitive picture.
Information is fundamentally antifragile. It literally feeds on attempts to harm it.
So criticism or negative publicity can actually be helpful.
Enormously helpful, provided the core idea survives the attack. The system responds convexly to attempts to shut it down. The decisive factor is the intensity of attention, not whether it's positive or negative.
So an idea is only really hurt when it's boring.
When it generates lukewarm general acceptance, that's the real danger. It is vastly superior to have a small percentage of extremely loyal, influential supporters combined with a high percentage of intense detractors. The detractors generate the signal, they put the idea on the map, leading to a net positive outcome.
Finally, we have to address what the sources identify as perhaps the largest single fragilizer of modern civilization.
Which is the structural absence of skin in the game.
And this absence creates the most potent ethical and structural asymmetry.
It does. The sources organize this problem into clear categories. First, you have those with no skin in the game. These are your bureaucrats, bankers, consultants, people who manage risk for others.
They get the upside from volatility, but manage to transfer the downside risk to someone else.
To the general populace or the taxpayer, yes. They become anti-fragile at the expense of making others fragile. This is the core agency problem.
And what about the positive end of that spectrum?
At the opposite extreme are those with soul in the game. These are the heroes, the innovators, the entrepreneurs who accept the downside risk on behalf of the system.
Like the Roman engineer who is expected to sleep under the bridge he built.
An excellent example. Their personal exposure guarantees an alignment between their interest and the outcome. The absence of this accountability among policymakers and centralized decision makers is the primary driver of systemic fragility.
This asymmetry becomes particularly clear when we look at how people think about risk, specifically comparing frequency versus payoff magnitude.
In domains governed by extreme events, what's called extremistan, how often someone is correct is almost irrelevant.
Compared to the magnitude of the payoff when they are correct.
Exactly. An anti-fragile bettor, like someone who correctly shorted fragile financial institutions before 2008, can be wrong frequently. They can lose small fixed amounts over years, but when they are right just once, the payoff is massive and transformative.
So focusing only on prediction frequency is deeply flawed in these environments.
It is. The prudent approach, as we concluded earlier, is to focus entirely on structuring your exposure. You limit the downside while ensuring maximal optionality for the upside, rather than attempting to predict the unpredictable event itself.
So to summarize, our analysis has demonstrated that in a world defined by complexity and radical uncertainty, modifying our exposure to risk is vastly more effective than trying to forecast rare events.
By embracing asymmetry, maximizing optionality, and restoring accountability, we can move from mere robustness toward achieving genuine anti-fragility.
We strongly recommend you continue your learning by reading the source material in full. It is an insightful and, I would say, essential work for anyone operating in environments governed by pervasive uncertainty.
And as a final thought for you to reflect on, we touched on the Lindy effect. This suggests that for non-perishable items like technologies, books, and institutions, every additional day they survive implies a longer remaining life expectancy.
So what does this principle suggest regarding the long-term survival prospects of the modern innovations, economic models, and centralized policies that have only existed for a very short, volatile period?
It's a question worth considering.
Thank you for joining us in this thorough examination of these key sources. We encourage all friends of the show to subscribe for more extensive explorations of essential source material. We wish you a great day.